The Battle of the Bulge took place in 1944 during December in the cold winter months and continued all the way into 1945 in January 25th. That's when it ended, January 25th. This battle was an extremely pivotal battle in terms of morale, strategy, terrain, geography, and in every which way. This was Germany's last-ditch effort. This was Germany's last hope for winning the war. And when they started losing that war, morale went way down. The beginning of this battle unfolded with the element of surprise. This was an ambush that Germany committed to. This was something the Allies did not expect, something they weren't planning for. And with that said, Germany was able to push deep west into Allied lines. It began with their German panzer units. Germany had 8 armored divisions and 13 infantry divisions, all of which they amassed in order to attack mainly American troops. The purpose of this attack was to capture the port of Antwerp. And to do that, they had hopes that they would capture many logistical nodes, such as refuel points, and areas such as Bastogne. In Bastogne, they had them encircled at one point. The German Panzer Army, they crossed into Luxembourg and attempted to cross the Moose River. When they were doing that, the Allies had few men to defend this town and were rushing in reserves in order to reinforce it. But they didn't make it in time. The Germans won the race, and when they encircled Bastogne, they gave them one chance to surrender, in which the general, Anthony McAuliffe, in one word, he said, "Nuts," right back. And saying nuts was not a nice gesture towards the Germans, saying that they're basically crazy. Bastogne was a hard-fought area, and the Germans needed this in order to disrupt Allied supplies, their supply lines, and to break up their troops. But they were not successful. Just as the battle's named, Battle of the Bulge, they were not able to break the Allied lines. The American troops were able to fight fiercely day by day, entrench themselves, and strategically maneuver in order to defend whatever key routes, roads, and essentially they stopped and disrupted the German attack. Bastogne involved days of bombarding. Allies were getting bombarded, but it all ended when General Patton came in and reinforced that army. There was also fighting going on at St. Vith. St. Vith was a key town as well, where the Germans also had it encircled. They encircled that 106th Division near St. Vith, and they captured many American men, but to no avail, as they were not able to capture that key supply town that was at a crossroads. St. Vith was important because it was another key logistical support area. It was a town that the Allies utilized in order to supply themselves many times. Bastogne and St. Vith were extremely important, and they're known today because they served as key transportation hubs in the Ardennes region. Germany blasted through the Ardennes region and tried so hard to get these two because of very many reasons. Or I'll go over 4 of them. One of them was control of road networks. These tunnels were vital junctions and sat at crossroads that they needed to capture in order to go westward and in order to resupply themselves and connect to the mainland of Germany. Holding these towns was extremely important, and not being able to get them slowed the German offensive to a halt. Defense and delay. The American forces at Bastogne, particularly the 101st Airborne Division and the defenders of St. Vith, they delayed the German advance, and this allowed Allies to regroup and reattack. And regrouping and reattacking is something the Germans did not want to happen, as General Patton brought in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd armies in order to launch a counteroffensive. German operational plans as well. The Germans, their plans were to capture these towns as quickly as possible in order to maintain any momentum they had and to help them advance towards Antwerp, towards the Moose River. The resistance at these two towns, St. Vith and Bastogne, diverted time, energy, and resources, which ruined the Germans' push. And then, in my opinion, what was one of the biggest losses here when they couldn't control Bastogne and when they couldn't control St. Vith was the psychological impact and the symbolic impact as well. In my opinion, not having any morale is something that broke the Germans. The Germans had this desperate last-ditch attempt, and when they couldn't finish it and when they couldn't achieve their objectives, they broke and lost all morale. In my opinion, this is what allowed America to be able to win. The Americans, high on morale, stayed surrounded. As said by that one general, nuts. He sent the message of nuts to Germans, even when he was surrounded. And that's an example of how morale and resilience can change the tide of a battle. And these were various things that ultimately contributed to the failure of the German offensive and the stage for the final push in Germany. A huge contributing factor to why Germany was able to push the Allies so far was because of air superiority. Initially, the Germans, since it's December, they launched their attack in December, and due to the heavy snowfall and weather conditions, Allied air superiority and aircraft were grounded. Them being grounded got rid of a lot of firepower for the Allies and gave the German troops the advantage when conducting their blitzkrieg-style attacks. This affected supply lines for the Allies, but even with these initial successes of the Germans, they would push down into the town and they would run out of fuel. This battle can be divided into many phases, specifically 3. The initial phase, the main phase, and the end phase. With the initial phase being already described, the Germany initially had a lot of successes and were able to push very deep with their surprise attacks and their blitzkrieg-style attacks. Their artillery barrages also help support that. The main phase of the battle began on the 20th of December. This second part of the battle was Germany's slowing advance coming to a halt. This slowing advance was due to the stiff Allied resistance described earlier. The stiff Allied resistance of Bastogne and at St. Vith is what caused this main phase to slow down the German attacks. In this main phase, the Germans began to lose air superiority. The Allies were getting aircraft in the air, which allowed them to fire upon vehicles such as their famous Tiger tank and Panzer tanks. This happening turned the tide of the battle. Lessons for future conflicts. There's so many lessons that can be learned from this battle. First of all is logistics, and logistics. Germany's lack of fuel doomed its offensive. The significance of air superiority was brought out not only in the battle, but the war. Aircraft dominated the battlefield, paving the way for the United States to dominate airways today. And the Battle of Bulge offered lessons in operational execution as well. The stress of and value of intelligence and reconnaissance, and knowing where your enemy's at and being able to recon what they're doing. Because of the failure of intelligence and not being able to recon what the enemy was doing, they were caught by surprise. The Allies did not see the German attack coming. And also the lapses in German judgment, right? The lapses in gathering and analyzing enemy movements led to devastating consequences for the Germans. The Germans underestimated what their opponent could do. Although they did have, it was very desperate for what they could do, what they were doing. It was also a lapse in judgment in terms of their logistical supplies and what they could do and offer as far as what the terrain allowed and geography. Also, we learned to be flexible in this battle. Being flexible is incredibly important in any field, any situation. Being able to adapt and make decisions is what a leader does. And in this battle, there were many leaders that made decisions and adapted. The flexibility of our command structures allowed us to react to these attacks quickly and to set in and fend off the German invasion. Overall, the Battle of the Bulge exemplified warfare in its purest form. The morale and unit cohesion was incredibly important on both sides. For the Germans, they had a desperate attempt at reclaiming the war, reclaiming the initiative and control of what was happening on the battlefield. And we saw that troops lost morale, and in doing so, they retreated. In losing morale, they lost the will to fight. They lost the will to keep going. And with the U.S. soldiers, they didn't lose that will. They kept the will to fight and kept going. And that's something that was incredibly important in that battle. As in those defenses, laying in those trenches, that takes incredible determination, and that's what the U.S. forces did. Overall, the Battle of the Bulge is a significant battle in history and will be remembered forever.